Okay, this is part 4 of Art of the Belle Epoch, the beautiful age, the golden age of Europe. And the point of it was just to show how extraordinary the painting was from the 1800s. Because everybody thinks, oh, you know, the Renaissance was the greatest painting, the Italian Renaissance in particular, in the 1400s and 1500s. But rather, the painting in the 1800s was extraordinary. And the Golden Age especially is thought to be from about 1872 to 1914. World War I sort of put an end to that. Martin Luther sort of destroyed the Italian Renaissance, okay, and the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. And then World War I sort of destroyed the Golden Age of Europe. And World War I was sort of like, you know, a suicide attempt by Europe. It was incredibly stupid. All the Christians killing each other like a bunch of morons. Okay, so anyway, here's the first painting. So what ties the theme together for today, part 4 of Belle Epoch, is we're going to show paintings made in the 1800s about the ancient Greeks. And where this is relevant is that the Europeans and the Americans of the 1800s, they had a very strong sense of being educated about the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. And everybody who wants to be well educated should study the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. They're very extraordinary. And we're going to talk about the ancient Greeks today. The ancient Greeks mostly for things that are good, for ideas about freedom and righteousness and beauty and creativity and poetry and art and all that. They're magnificent. So we're starting out here with a painting of Prometheus Bound. This painting is by Thomas Cole. He's an American artist, and he's more of a landscape artist than a portrait painter, so that he makes the person kind of small. But there's Prometheus, and that theme echoes into the modern age, whereby when a person does great good things, they get punished. And that's kind of how our age is screwed up as well. You know, if you're doing great things in medicine, you're afraid Big Pharma is going to kill you. If you're doing great things in nutrition, you're afraid Big Food is going to kill you. Okay, if you're doing great things for helping people, you're afraid, you know, some of the political types are going to come after you. So we live kind of in an unfortunate age where the big dollars don't want good things for the proles. So the proles, you know, have to tread softly a little bit, let's say. So here's a more of a close-up picture of Prometheus. Hercules eventually came and saved Prometheus. Prometheus had been punished by Zeus because he had had the nerve to steal fire from Mount Olympus and give it to the people. Okay, so Zeus punished him by chaining him to a rock, and then every day a vulture, a symbol of Zeus, would come and eat his liver. Luckily, the liver can regenerate, but that's what happened. And then Hercules saved him by shooting the eagle with an arrow. Okay, a painting by Carl Bloch, the great artist of the 1800s. We're going to see a lot of paintings by him. And then here's a painting I really like. It's called Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting, but there's more to this painting than that. So here's Sadak climbing up the hills, up to his destiny, his quest. This can also be seen to represent Prometheus climbing up Mount Olympus to steal fire from Zeus to give it to the humans. Okay, and I just like this painting in general. The idea of the struggle, the effort it takes to improve oneself towards achieving a goal. It's a beautiful painting. John Martin was a great artist, great English artist. Okay, now here is a painting called After the Flood, as Deucalion holds up his wife. So the story of the flood is not just unique to the Christians and the Bible. Okay, the story of the flood is relatively generic to a lot of ancient cultures, suggesting it's true. You know, Mesopotamia, between the rivers. There's flood stories from all these different places, okay, including the ancient Greeks, suggesting, again, that something really happened, like there really was a flood, okay? And there's a lot of interesting things that fit the Bible when you look at them more closely. And here is the return of spring. So this is Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. And Persephone had been kidnapped by Hades, the king of the underworld, you know, taken underground and made the two-backed beast with him, forced into that, and so-called ate the pomegranate seeds. And she thus couldn't 100% go back to living on earth with her mother. There's her mother Demeter. There's Persephone, escorted by Hermes. Hades is down in the underworld, the king of the underworld. But it's sort of the ancient Greek myth is the story of why there's a winter and then why spring comes. Spring comes when Persephone is returned to her mother, and she spends about half the year above ground and the other half below. Here's the painting of Echo and Narcissus. So Echo had been punished because she had been hiding a secret of where Zeus was frolicking with one of her nymph friends, okay? And when Hera, Zeus's wife, came by to find out where was Zeus, she sort of BS'd Hera and distracted her with some chit-chat. So Hera said, "You little chit-chatting liar," and she came back and she punished Echo and would no longer allow her to be such a little gossip big mouth and only allowed her to echo what other people would say. So she then fell in love with the handsome young man Narcissus. And Narcissus had fallen in love with his own reflection in the water. And so I joke that that's one of the side effects of the vegan diet is the person who follows it often becomes so good looking and ages so well, they become too good looking for their spouse. That's one of the dangers of it, okay? But anyway, this is Echo and Narcissus. She could only echo what the other person said. And when you start reading and studying Greek myth, it's very enjoyable. Plus, you'll be amazed at how often it provides useful metaphors for situations in our own life. So here is the sculptor, okay, Pygmalion making his statue Galatea, and he falls in love with her. Okay, and there's a lot of jokes can come out of this, like Gerald Pollack, PhD. He's a scientist who figured out the fourth phase of water. I don't know if you know this, we're not going to get into this too much, but the fourth phase of water means that everybody knows that there's liquid water, there's water vapor, and there's ice, solid water. But there's actually a fourth phase of water, and that's a gel phase, kind of like Jell-O. And if you think about it, if somebody's cut, if somebody's stabbed and they bleed blood, red stuff. Okay, they don't bleed water. But if we're 60% water, how come you don't leak water? And the reason is the water's in a gel phase. Okay, and you can say, well, give me an example of that. I never heard that before. Well, crack an egg. What does it look like? It looks like a gel. Okay. There's a lot more to it than that. It's actually a very interesting subject, the fourth phase of water, but we'll get into some other time. You can watch his videos. There's a whole bunch of YouTube videos about him on YouTube, Gerald Pollack, and the fourth phase of water. This painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme. He is a really good artist of classical subjects. Okay, here is Icarus, lament for Icarus after his fall. Him and his father Daedalus had escaped out of the maze, by building wings for themselves, but he flew too close to the sun and part of the wax on his wings melted and he crashed down. And so the beautiful nymphs are, mourning for him. Beautiful painting, isn't it? Here is the story of the sword of Damocles. And Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn used to like to talk about this. He says, until you go low-fat vegan, you've always got the sword of Damocles hanging over your head that you could have a myocardial infarction. But once you go low-fat vegan, you don't ever have cardiovascular events. Isn't that nice? And the reason that's so great is not only do you avoid cardiovascular events, you avoid congestive heart failure, you avoid going into atrial fibrillation. I've talked about atrial fibrillation, how that's kind of scary. A person can be like pulled down underground, like being yanked by the Morlocks. Healthy one day, sick the next. So why not just keep your coronaries clean? Low-fat, vegan, no oil. Okay, now here's a painting of Theseus fighting a centaur by Antonio Canova. And what I'm getting at here is, look at the theme here. He's going to beat the shit out of a centaur. Okay, what I'm trying to say is the Greeks were macho. They were masculine. People sometimes try to play that down. No. Their biggest hero was Hercules. Okay, Hercules, who could fight. And they were very proud of themselves for having fought off the Persians, okay? There was the Persian War, then later on there was a Peloponnesian War. So the Persian War was good. They were fighting to defend Greece, and Athens and Sparta unified, okay? But the Peloponnesian War later was stupid, where they were fighting themselves, okay? But the point I want to make is this was sort of the mentality of the ancient Greeks. Don't mess with me, I'll kick your butt, okay? They were tough. They were proud. Okay, the more you study them, the more you will like them. Yes, they did do some bad things. Everybody sometimes does some bad things, but the good things the ancient Greeks did 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times outweigh the bad things they did. Okay, here's another story from the ancient Greeks. This Thetis, the sea nymph, the mother, dipped her child Achilles into the water, the river Styx, and it made him, immortal except for one weak spot, his heel, and that is the Achilles heel, the weakness of a person, of a thing. With the upcoming war, between the Greeks and the Trojans, she had heard the prophecy that her son Achilles was going to die, and she begged Zeus to spare him. Achilles was given a choice. Either go fight in the Trojan War and achieve glory, eternal glory, and you will die, or live a quiet, peaceful life, and you'll live, but your life will be boring. And he chose to go and fight. And that's sort of the mentality of the ancient Greeks. So they're sending a message to the young people. The Iliad and the Odyssey were sort of like the Bible for the ancient Greeks. And they're saying, this is what a young man should do. he should fight for what they felt was right. Okay, and then afterwards, Cassandra was a princess of Troy. She was given the power of prophecy, except no one would believe her. Because Apollo would want to seduce her. She wouldn't let Apollo seduce her, so he punished her in a sense by giving her the ability to prophesy, but not to be believed. So it was very frustrating for her. She's pulling her hair out. She said that Paris should not steal Helen of Troy from Menelaus, the king of Sparta. She said the Trojans should not allow the Trojan horse into Troy. No one believed her, and they paid a terrible price for it. And then she was sort of taken as a mistress to Agamemnon, okay, and that led to more problems too. Okay, so here is the Trojan horse and brought inside the walls of Troy foolishly, and then at night the Greek soldiers came out, opened up the gates. They had pretended to leave, but the other Greek soldiers came back from their boats and they sacked Troy, and it was a big disaster for Troy. So that's what they say, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Okay, later there's a story of Odysseus, trying to make his way home, and here he is, the great Cyclops monster Polyphemus has thrown a rock at them. Odysseus had made the mistake of shouting out that it was he, Odysseus, who had blinded Polyphemus, and that was a big stupid thing to do because Polyphemus was a child of Poseidon, the god of the oceans, who then took out more wrath against Odysseus and his men. Okay, here's Odysseus going by where the sirens were located, and they would very charming. Women can be very charming, as we all know, and all the men had covered their ears so they wouldn't be distracted by the sirens. But Odysseus just had himself tied to the mast so he could hear their song. Another painting by Herbert Draper. He's the one who painted that one of Icarus. Later on, Odysseus ended up near another island, and Nausicaa was sort of the daughter of the king, and she gave him some clothes. He didn't have any clothes. He was hiding in the bushes while she was out with her friends. Okay. Later on, she married his son Telemachus. Okay. So the story of Odysseus coming back home is actually kind of interesting. I liked the wanderings of Odysseus better than I liked the Trojan War. For me, the Trojan War was a little bit boring. Fight, okay? Achilles fighting Hector, okay? But Odysseus and all the little things he has to navigate to make his way home is a little more entertaining. It's a great story. Odysseus kisses the ground upon returning to his native land, and there's Athena looking on over him. Okay. All right, Penelope and his suitors. Okay, so the suitors, while Odysseus was gone for a long time, 20 years, 10 years for the Trojan War, another 10 years for his wanderings to get back, they were all trying to seduce her and get her to marry them so they could take over the kingdom of Ithaca. And she wanted no part of them. She was a good, loyal wife. So you want to look at how the ideal woman should behave in the mind of a man. It's like Penelope. And this was the ancient bed of Odysseus and Penelope, built around an olive tree. So an olive tree is pretty, it's as ingrained in Greek history as anything could be. And he knew that they had that bed. That was one of the little questions she asked for him, to know if it was really him after all these years, when he'd come back after 20 years. Here's the apotheosis of Homer, how much they loved the guy. And, Homer had written the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Idiot and the Oddity, okay? And some people say it wasn't really written by Homer. Okay, yeah, it's just written by somebody who was like Homer. Give me a freaking break, okay? They try to do that with the Bible chapters, too. There's always some scumbag, phony scholar who tries to undermine history, okay? And so you should not fall for it. Western history is magnificent. The ancient Greeks are magnificent. There's nothing like them. All the ancient cultures really are, totally boring and lightweight compared to the ancient Greeks. They're magnificent, okay? It's one of the most valuable things you'll ever study in your life, is to get to know the history of the ancient Greeks better. Okay, it gives you hope and pride in what mankind could do. Now, Clytemnestra is sort of the prototype of the evil wife. Now, don't get me wrong, she had good reason to be pissed off at Agamemnon. He had sacrificed their daughter to get the winds, Iphigenia. That's one version of what had happened to Iphigenia. There's actually another version too, but that's one version of it, and that pissed her off, okay? She was pissed off at him for having a mistress in Cassandra, okay? But she killed Agamemnon. She tricked him and killed him when he came back. And then that led to the next tit for tat, whereby the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra revenged himself upon her, and then her ghost called out the Furies who came after Orestes, and that later on led to the legal court system in Athens, on the Acropolis, so they could handle disputes without having endless tit for tats like this, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And this is by William Bouguereau, a great French artist of the 1800s. All these paintings are artists for the 1800s. That's sort of what ties them together in the theme of the Greeks. Okay, here's one, the Oracle, the Oracle of Delphi, predicting the future. Okay, and Apollo ran the Oracle. All right, here's a statue of the three Graces. And by the way, the Greeks were great at statuary. They were magnificent at it. And the Romans just copied them. And Michelangelo, learned from the Greeks. Okay, they were magnificent. And sort of the sense of life and beauty and elegance and detail, you could just see they were a superior civilization. All the other cultures that made statues, they're kind of like pieces of crap. Look like a kid could do them. These were much more sophisticated. And there's a lot of great ancient Greek sculptures. Okay. The Graces, female beauty and charm and whatnot. And here's the Muses, okay? This Muse doesn't look too happy. It's probably the artist's wife, and she's pissed off for having to pose so long, okay? They both look a little annoyed. But anyway, here's the Muse of literature and the Muse of music, okay? And again, you see the magnificent Greek buildings in the background hinting at the Acropolis, okay? And, more of the Greek stories, sort of Theseus was sort of the great hero of Athens, and he was a more intellectual hero, characteristic of Athens, rather than for the rest of Greece. They sort of favored a brute like Hercules. Okay, so here is Oedipus at Colonus. He's blinded. His daughter Antigone is staying with him. Theseus was nice to him, let him stay in Athens. And that was sort of showing the right thing to do, forgiveness. Because, Oedipus didn't do what he did on purpose. He was confused, okay? He was a victim of his fate. Okay, and here's a story of Antigone where her brothers had been feuding, okay? And this was over the kingdom of Thebes. And the new ruler of Thebes, Creon, had declared that one of her brothers was sort of a traitor to Thebes and that he should be not given a burial and left to the dogs. And she refused to allow that to happen, and she gave him a ceremonial burial. And she was imprisoned for that and sentenced to death. The son of Creon the king was in love with her, okay? And he said, "You knew the rule. Why did you defy me?" And she said, "Because the laws of God are above the laws of men. The laws of heaven are not of today nor yesterday, but for all time." And King Creon was a fool. He ignored the words of Antigone. She was right. He should have forgiven her, but he didn't. And then because of that, his own son, who loved her, was engaged to her, committed suicide. Because she lost her son, his wife committed suicide, and Antigone was killed too. And it was so stupid. The whole thing was stupid, and it just shows you that he's a bad ruler, okay? He should have forgiven Antigone and given the proper burial to, Polynices, okay? This painting is by Sebastian Norblin. So this is one of the all-time great moral theater plays of the ancient Greeks. They were magnificent. There's a whole bunch of magnificent plays for the ancient Greeks, but that's one of the all-time great tragedies, the story of Antigone. Here's just one scene from one of the Greek theater. This one is by Aristophanes. He's more of a comedic playwright rather than the great tragedians like Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. Okay, Aristophanes was the comedian, the one who wrote The Clouds, the play about Socrates, for example. Okay, here's one example of a Greek theater, the way it was built in the hills for better acoustics. But, the aristocratic men, they all would attend these, and they had a lot of aristocrats. Yeah, they did also have slavery. All ancient cultures had some slavery. But the aristocratic men of ancient Greeks, especially Athens, were incredibly sophisticated. It was like a time of geniuses. Like about as high a concentration of geniuses you'll ever see anywhere in the history of the world. Okay, here's Phidias, the sculptor, and he built these great palaces with all these magnificent sculptures, and this was being shown to, Pericles, the leader of Athens, and Aspasia, his girlfriend, Aspasia was sort of like a Cartesian philosopher female. That gets into the heterae, the idea of the heterae usually being foreign from Athens, educated women who the men did find interesting. On the other hand, they didn't want the Athenian women to be educated because they felt they would be better wives if they were not educated. And that's a whole other topic which we're not going to go into today. Here's Edith Hamilton. She's a great scholar of ancient Greece. An American lady, brilliant. She spoke ancient. She could read the ancient Greek. She could read the ancient Latin, as a lot of people could in those days. They knew Latin and Greek. Here's one discus thrower, and she said the Greeks. There's a Roman copy of the ancient Greek statue. She said the Greeks played. They had Olympic games. They had sporting contests. She said the Romans did not play. A lot of people think the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans were a lot like each other. No, they were not. The ancient Greeks were 1,000 times better than the ancient Romans. The ancient Romans were kind of brutal, kind of collectivist. The emperor had total power over everyone. There was no discussion. The emperor, whatever the emperor said, would go. And the Romans had several phases. They originally had a monarchy, then they had a republic, which was their sort of high point. They had an early kind of a golden age when they first empire through Augustus, who was really in some things he continued from the republic, but the more it became just an empire ruled by an emperor, they started to go downhill as they had total power and they abused it. So here's what she has to say, Edith Hamilton. The Greeks played. They had Olympic Games. The Romans did not play. A gladiator fight meant death. Gladiator fights were not play. And that's kind of like how sick the crowd is to want to see that. Okay, here's a sick child brought to the temple of Asclepius. Asclepius was sort of the ancient Greek healer. Later on, of course, we know about Hippocrates. We know about the centaur before Asclepius, who actually helped educate Asclepius, was Chiron. And he had his own wounds that he had to heal. And there was the idea of the healer as somebody who's had their own problems. And in learning to get over their own problems, they become better healers. And there's a lot of truth in that. Like Dr. McDougall had a stroke, when he's just a young man. All right. I was fat when I was young, and my parents were sick, and that motivated me to start learning stuff outside of conventional medicine, because conventional medicine was not able to help myself, my father, or my mother, so I knew I had to learn something else if there was anything that could be learned. Okay, here's a beautiful painting of the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras was a genius of the ancient Greeks, and he recommended everybody eat a vegan diet. It was called the Pythagorean diet. He figured out the octave scale on the harp, and so the Pythagoreans were good at mathematics, were good at music. They loved to celebrate the sunrise. So kind of a nice life, getting out in the sun, making music with friends. It's happy and it doesn't cost a lot of money. Dream of Arcadia, sort of the prototype vision in one's mind's eye of pastoral paradise for the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greek architecture, we love it. It's so beautiful, and sort of an ancient Greek landscape, okay? Taken from a Grecian urn poem, the phrase Arcadia, an ancient Greek pastoral paradise. The city on a hill is another thing we'll see there from the ancient Greeks. And there's a great sense of optimism and hope and belief in progress for humans. So here's the Greeks, building some of their ancient magnificent buildings. So, the limited tools that they had, they made incredibly beautiful buildings like the Acropolis and beautiful sculpture. The ancient Greeks were quite amazing. And here's just a painting of the Acropolis, okay? The city on a hill. There's a goddess Athena of the city. There's a Parthenon. It's magnificent. The Areopagus, where they held their public events and trials. This is Aspasia, the girlfriend of Pericles, the leader of ancient Greece. And the hill is next to the sea, next to the Acropolis for Semele, okay? Again, it's just sort of elegant and beautiful. Here's a conversation between Pericles and Socrates and Aspasia. So Aspasia is a girlfriend of Pericles. She herself was a pretty educated, smart lady and a philosopher. Okay, and now here is when Socrates finds his student Alcibiades with the heterae. They're the educated courtesans, often foreign-born. And Alcibiades was a brilliant young man and a bit of a wild man. And there's a lot of interesting stories about him when you study ancient Greece, including stories about him and the Peloponnesian War and his role in that, his role in the battle with Syracuse. It's all rather interesting. Here's a great famous funeral oration of Pericles, which is in the book The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. Okay, and again, you see, people had a chance to have their opinions spoken. There was free speech amongst the aristocrats, looking up at the magnificent city on a hill of the Acropolis. Western civilization and Christianity. Everybody talks about the Old Testament of the Bible. It has a tremendous amount, I would say even more, to do with the ancient Greeks than it does with the Old Testament. Don't get me wrong. I know the Old Testament is the foundation of Christianity. Yeah, I get all that. But culturally, I'm telling you, there's a lot of stuff when you start looking at it, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that comes out of ancient Greeks, the theater, the plays, the philosophy, the Republic of Plato, okay? Platonism, Aristotelianism, okay? These are foundational elements. Aristotelianism led especially to the Catholic Church and everything Catholic, versus Platonism to Augustinian views led a lot to what we now call Protestant version of Christian religion. Okay, here's just the cover of one book of the History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. Okay, and Thucydides said, "My work is not designed, for popularity of the hour. It is to, stand for all time." Okay, and there's better versions of translation of this quote, but the point is still made. He wasn't doing this to be popular. He was doing this to show mankind for the rest of time, as a gift to mankind, how humans actually behave. Okay, he had been sort of humiliated and disgraced and ostracized, claiming that he failed his duty as an admiral in the Athenian navy, and he sort of had some time to himself where he could write about the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. And it's really kind of a disgrace, because what you see is in these smaller countries, like the ancient Greeks, unless they're unified, they become weak, and an outside big power like Macedonia, in the case of the ancient Greeks, takes them over. Later on, ancient Rome took everybody over. But that's one of the most important things, and I've seen that pattern repeat itself. Like, my father's from Ireland, and Ireland itself could not unify its chieftains, and so they get their butt kicked by the larger forces of a national group like England, okay? And we saw something similar happen to Italy. Italy became weak because it wasn't unified. And that's a lot of what Machiavelli was all about, trying to get Italy to unify so that it wouldn't be so vulnerable to the French or to the Spanish or to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who came in and sacked Rome like in 1526 and destroyed the place. And like the modern Christians, because they're not unified, they're being sided all over the planet. The modern Christians are just too oblivious and stupid, and they're selfish, and they don't help each other. I see that too. Like, I've written all these books, and I get hardly any reviews on my books. Somebody from another ethnic group writes a book, and they get all these co-ethnics. They write a whole bunch of reviews. Okay. And Christians just sort of like go their own way, oblivious, and don't even realize they're being progressively, systematically genocided all over the world. Okay, here's Diogenes. He tells Alexander to stop blocking his sun. So, Alexander the Great says, he liked Diogenes. He's the great sort of homeless philosopher of the ancient Greek times. And Alexander the Great says, "Okay, you're cracking me up, Diogenes. I'll grant you whatever wish I can. Just go ahead and make one wish." And Diogenes said, "I wish you would get out of my sun." Diogenes was known for having a lantern, and he would walk around Athens and he'd say, "I'm trying to find one honest man. I can't find one honest man." He lived like a homeless guy. He would defecate in the streets. And the people really liked him, though, because he was very funny and he was honest about things. Here's a painting that I really like called Lost Illusion by Charles Gleyre, 1843. And it's sort of the reminder that, men, we're kind of made to work. We can work all day long. All this stuff about females being like us is total nonsense. Look at the powerful shoulders this guy has. He can work from sunrise to sundown nonstop all day. Look at the women. They got little shoulders like a child, okay? They don't have the physical strength to do the kind of work a man does, okay? Also, they're kind of designed, women, to understand children. Any guy who's had children knows that the wife and the grandma and his mom and his mother-in-law, they're just better at understanding the kid and figuring out what the kid needs. They just are. I mean, it's just an inborn thing. And so we like them more than they like us. And we enjoy all their singing and talking and playing and dancing and all that other stuff and the way they make the house, okay? And so this is the idea of the man is sad because he kind of sees them all going away right here. And I think there's something like that when the humanities of culture are taken away from mankind and he simply becomes sort of like a trade animal, like a slave. And there's a big element of that in our modern society. Notice our art museums. All the art is taken out and replaced with this phony modern art crap. Music is being destroyed by this pop culture, okay? So the arts are slowly being taken away, and it's important for Christians to learn their history, their traditions about the ancient Greeks, about the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, everything related to that. Good to know about the ancient Romans too, so you recognize BS. Good to learn about, the 1800s, the Belle Epoch, like what we're talking about today, the Golden Age of Europe, etc. So you see all this magnificent culture, and you have high standards. There's actually a lot of great artists today, but nobody knows they exist because they're not allowed in the museums. Museums have been taken over by the cow, and then the moon, then the East, that have destroyed them because they're hiding culture from the people because they want to degrade civilization. Modern art is not art, it is evil. It's the emperor's new clothes. And you should be very skeptical. Anybody who says it is, they've lost their respect. You should not respect them. They're illegitimate. If a child could make it, it ain't real art, all right? A lot of times it's to launder, dinero. Okay, here's a painting of the Parthenon by Edwin Church, and there's a great French philosopher, Jacques Barzone. He wrote the book Dawn to Decadence, The Dawn of Civilization to Decadence, and he said there should be a picture of the Parthenon in every school classroom. And it is true. If you learn the ancient Greeks, you recognize what the good things mankind is capable of. And if you learn the ancient Romans, you recognize the bad behavior mankind is capable of. And then you become less likely to get chumped into stuff. You don't believe the latest BS that comes along. Anyways, I hope you found that helpful. That's part 4 of the Belle Epoch, the Golden Age.